Okay. I am Jennifer Newman, head of school, but we've been with each other for so long that I know that you know that. But I am excited to not run this webinar because once your student gets to 13th grade, I get to hand off parenting to Lisa Madalena with kind of like Aunt Carly going on. So that's exciting. So let's see. So I am going to hand it over to them. If you are ready to, let's see. So it says, looks like we have one more parent. If you're a parent and you're out there or a student, sorry, Jane, please put your name in the chat just so I can see who is here, just in case we have specific questions, we can make sure we address them to you. All right, turning it over to Lisa Madalena and Carly Bellairs. Go. Oh, I'm clicking the slides. Okay, those of you that are with me, I'm so sorry. I will get better, I promise.
So a lot of this information, well, really all the information I am about to go through are things that Ms. Madalena and I will go through if we haven't already touched on these things already. So should all be information that the 13th graders are already familiar with, and we'll continue to touch on it throughout this year. So in the first part of 13th grade, and then throughout, but really like in these first few months, we talk about selecting schools and applying to schools, and those pieces. And Ms. Madalena does a lot within 13 Seminar to help support that work. So a big thing that we talk about is when you're applying to schools, looking for certain things in those schools. So, you know, things like, are you looking for a big school or small school, a school with a religious affiliation or not, an all girls school or all boys school, you know, what sort of things are you looking for? And then we really encourage students to think about a handful of different schools and have those things like a few different categories. So there's a reach school. So maybe your GPA and your test scores don't quite meet their average, but it's not too far away, but it's more of a reach. Then there's like backup schools, which I don't really love that term, but I think it's something that we hear a lot. And like safe schools, so like things that you know that your GPA and your test scores would likely get you in. And then there's like the comfort level. So your test scores and your GPA are like right around that average range, maybe a little bit below, a little bit higher. Your chances of getting are probably pretty good, but it's not a guarantee. And so a big recommendation is that you think about applying to, you know, about 4 different schools. That allows you to have some different options. If you're touching in and applying to those different categories, you are hopefully guaranteeing that you're getting into one of those schools. And then you have those reach and those dream schools that would be great if you got in. That also helps to try to accommodate for some financial differences, which we'll talk about in a little bit what that can look like. But that's just kind of some of the things that you'll hear me mention and probably Ms. Madalena mention when it comes to applying to schools. So a really important thing for students to do is to self-assess their likelihood of getting to schools by using those numbers I mentioned before, the GPA and test scores. Now, the good-ish thing about this year is that a lot of schools are waiving that testing requirement. So that eliminates one number out of the criteria that they're looking for. The downside to that is then schools are really heavily relying on the GPA. So that's a huge difference for our students this year as opposed to previous schools, is that for this graduating class, the test score requirement has really been removed from a lot of schools. So, you know, they will also be looking at a more holistic approach. So things like your extracurriculars, how hard are the classes that you took, what sort of things did you do, you know, like I said, outside of school. And so throughout this school selection process, students have been using Zello last year and then Career Cruising the previous years to search for schools and to search for careers. So this has been something that they've been doing throughout their time at OEC, and likely did it all throughout middle school too, because Career Cruising was something that they should have been doing in middle school as well. But like this is the time where they use all that knowledge that they've been accumulating throughout that time to really figure out the schools that they're going to apply to and then apply. Next slide, please. So last week and the week before, Ms. Madalena and I went through the Common App with students to show them how to create their account, what sort of nuances they need to look for. But the Common application is one spot that students can use to apply to multiple different schools. So it's kind of nice because instead of having to fill out an application for 5 different schools, you're really filling out more or less one application and can submit that to multiple different schools. There's also the Coalition app, which does the same thing. And both serve similar schools, but the Common App uses or has partnerships with more schools than the Coalition app. But the first step when applying to schools is to see what method schools use for their applications. So for example, Oakland University doesn't use the Common App. So if a student wanted to apply to OU, they wouldn't be able to use the Common App to complete that process. But Wayne State, Michigan State, U of M, they all use the Common App. So the important thing is to see what platform your schools are using and then to create those applications. For a lot of schools, you will be applying right through their website. So you just go to their main website, click on apply, and then they have a format right there. But again, for students who are applying to multiple schools that use the Common App or the Coalition app, that's something to keep in mind because it might just cut down on their work a little bit. Some big things that we talk to students about are the application deadlines. So, we will talk a lot about the November 1st deadline because that's a really common first early decision deadline. So like Michigan State, if you want to be considered for priority scholarship, you'd want to meet that November 1st deadline. But then there's some schools that have rolling admissions, meaning that you can apply all throughout the school year. So they don't have that same kind of deadline. So it's really important for students to pay attention to the individual application deadlines of their school. One thing that Ms. Nalene and I highlighted when we went through the Common App is it's important to pay attention to kind of two different deadlines. The first is the school's deadline. So when do you have to submit your application by? And the other is the scholarship deadline. So again, to kind of use Oakland University as an example, you can keep applying to their school. They have rolling admissions, but if you want to be considered for scholarships, which everyone should try to meet this deadline because you want scholarships, you need to apply by March. So you want to keep those two deadlines in mind and always work towards that earlier deadline. Next slide, please. So again, another thing that we touched on with students the past 2 weeks were letters of recommendation. So it's really important to start asking sooner rather than later. The teachers, myself, we get lots of requests. And so the earlier we can start getting those requests in and start trying to manage our time, the easier and more helpful it is for us. Really for students who are using the Common App, they all have to add me in because they have to have the counselor's portion. But for the teachers, some schools are going to require letters of recommendation, some schools are not. But again, the earlier they can ask their teachers, the better. And so professors and OEC teachers are both good sources, and really more so the OEC teachers, because your high school teachers are the ones who are going to know you better. They've seen you more often, they've gotten to know you better. And unless you've really formed a really tight partnership with a college professor, they don't have that same knowledge of who you are. So the OEC teachers are a really good source for those letters of recommendation. So, what we tell students is first, ask in person, and then follow up with an email, including when are the deadlines? What schools are you applying to? What are you interested in? And then of course, including a resume. And that just helps the recommender include those really important pieces of information about the student. One thing that I mentioned is, for this graduating class, they have 2 teachers that are no longer at our school. So for Ms. Wieland, they really should be asking for any letters of recommendation from her really by this week. She has a lot that's going on and wants to provide that support to students, but needs lots of advance notice. And then Ms. Rosenthal is still teaching within the district, but she has a whole new set of responsibilities. So again, the earlier you can ask them, even better. So what I also encourage students to do is that if they notice that a recommendation hasn't been submitted and there's 3 weeks before the deadline, send a reminder email, just checking in, let me know if there's anything else that you need, just following up, because that is on them to follow up with that recommender. And then of course, sending a thank you note is always really nice and greatly appreciated, especially to keep that relationship going. And if they will need any letters of recommendation in the future, that's just a nice way to keep that relationship going. Next slide, please. So another thing we went over, and we'll continue to remind students about this because I think this is something that sometimes gets pushed to the back of people's mind, is transcripts. So no matter what school you're applying to, you need to send your high school and your college transcript to every school that you're applying to. So for high school, we use Parchment. Every student was given a code and directions of how to access their Parchment account. They go in, they request that transcript to be sent, I upload it, and it gets automatically sent to that school. For OCC, you need to go online, and I took a screenshot that you really can't see, but it's a screenshot of how you request the college transcripts. And it's pretty straightforward. It is just a little tedious. There's lots of information to apply. Parchment is much easier, but OCC does not use Parchment. So again, they will want to do that for every school that they apply to. What students I think sometimes get confused with is you don't have to wait until your application is complete to send your transcripts. Students, if they know that they're going to apply to like these 5 schools, they can send their transcripts right now to those schools. As soon as schools get that first piece of information about a student, they create a file on them. And so they continue to add to it as students submit more information. And so the mid-year and end-of-year reports are things that I will definitely be reminding students about as the time comes. But a lot of schools need updated transcripts after first semester and then, of course, at the end of the year. But again, I'll continue to remind students when that time arises. Next slide, please. So this is something that we touched on that I think is really important is the scholarships. And so, since 2 years ago, I went into focus classes and talked to students about setting up some scholarship search sites. But the big thing that I stress to students, and that Ms. Madalena stresses as well, is that the biggest source of scholarship money will come from the specific college or university that students are applying to. So that's why it's so important to check the school's website for their scholarship deadlines, because you don't want to miss that. And so with that, some schools will automatically consider students for scholarships as soon as they receive the application. Others require you to fill out supplemental materials or to submit applications through a different process. So just being really mindful of that is important. And so I just try to list some schools with specific scholarship deadlines, but I did share a Google sheet with the 13th grade students twice now, and it has all of the schools and colleges in the state of Michigan, their application deadlines, their scholarship deadlines, links to their websites for these things. So it's all in one place. So they do have access to that, but it's also easy to search for. So yesterday, we had our first college admissions visit with Madonna University. And so on the next slide, you're going to see an example of some of the charts that schools have to show their scholarship funds set up. So Ms. Newman, if you could go to the next slide. So some schools, like Madonna, as you can see here, Oakland University, U of M Dearborn, they have kind of like this set grid. So if you have this GPA and this test score, you're going to get this amount of money. And it's just very straightforward. Schools are making some adjustments for students without test scores to try to accommodate that. Some schools, you still need to submit a test score to be eligible for their scholarships. That varies school by school. But here with Madonna, you can see how they made up for not having a test score. So that trustee scholarship, that big one that they have, if you have a 3.8 or higher, you get the scholarship. Or if you do have a test score, it's a lower GPA and they make up that difference with a test score. So you can see how that breaks down here. But one thing to be really mindful of is Madonna is a private school. So their costs, they estimated their tuition, room and board, housing for a year was about $31,000. So that trustee scholarship is really nice. It's $12,000 a year. That's great. But really that just kind of brings it down to what a public school might be. So when you see these scholarships amounts, just make sure you're comparing it to the total cost of that school, so that way you can get a picture of how much that cost of attendance would really be. But like I said, some schools use this kind of chart format, some schools do not. But regardless, scholarships from the specific university or college are going to be the biggest source of funds. So if you're not eligible for scholarships in this realm, it's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit harder to get some of the scholarships. Which leads us to the next slide. So like throughout the past couple of years, and last year when I went into focus classes to talk about their NMSQT scores. One thing I talked about is there's lots of scholarship sites to sign up for, but it takes quite a bit of work to look for scholarships. So there are some like really big scholarships, like the Coca-Cola scholarship is really well known. It's $20,000, so it's huge, but it's a national scholarship that has lots of students applying. So the chances of you not only meeting the criteria, but also getting that are pretty slim. So these websites, along with ones that I've shared with students like Going Merry, help students to find some of the smaller scholarships that might not seem as exciting, but will help narrow the pool. So maybe it's a scholarship for $1,000 or $500. You're probably going to have fewer students competing for that, so that might be, lower the competition for that scholarship. But again, it does take quite a bit of time to do this scholarship search digging, and they're all very competitive because everyone's looking for this money. So what I've always recommended to students is start setting aside time, usually in their 12th grade year, and definitely this year as well, to really do some digging. So for some of the sites, you like plug in information, you create an account, and then it says, okay, you might be eligible for these scholarships, but you still have to filter through those scholarships, take the time to like see what you really are eligible for, and then actually apply to them. One of the reasons why I talk a lot about Going Merry is it's like the Common App for scholarships. So instead of applying to like 5 different scholarships and submitting that information 5 times, you create and plug in your information once and then submit it to 5 different places. Miss Madeline and I, as we get notices about scholarships that come up, we email that out to students. I will post it on Twitter. I send it out in my newsletter. So we try as many avenues as possible to get that information out to students, but it's really on them to take advantage of the resources that we're providing to do that research and to actually apply. Next scholarship, or not next scholarship, next slide, please. So with the talk of money and paying for school comes the conversation about the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. And so this is the application that you'll complete to see what you might be eligible for as far as loans, grants, work study. And it is frequently used for schools for you to be eligible for any scholarships. So for example, I showed you the chart for Madonna. They require a FAFSA to be on file for you to get that scholarship funds. So even though it's a merit-based scholarship, so it's based on your grades, they still need this application piece in order for you to be eligible. So even if you don't think that your family will qualify for grants or work study, this is still a really important thing to fill out because lots of scholarships require this to be on file. And I kind of always say, like, you never know what you might be eligible for. And if you do need loans, this is a good way to see what you could qualify for. And so a student, no matter what, has to have their parents' information. I shouldn't say no matter what. Unless a student is emancipated, they need their parents' input. So this is like a joint project between parents and students, with really the parents providing the most information. So for the students, they'll definitely need parents' help in filling this part out. So we are having a FAFSA event on Wednesday, October 7th at 6:30 p.m. It will be a virtual event. I have a meeting with, his name is Greg, and he's put on this event for us in the past to just figure out the logistics, because obviously this will look very different. We typically have it in our computer lab, but it's a time for families to come together and fill out the FAFSA together with the help of Oakland University's financial aid department. So Oakland University is really amazing. They provide tons of free FAFSA support and financial aid support to students and families, even if they have no intention of going to Oakland University. So once I get the details for this October 7th event, I will send them out to you so you have that and can sign up. So I saw this message in the chat, and the FAFSA does need to be completed every year for every student. So if you have several students in college, it needs to be completed for them. And yes, it does need to be completed every single year that they're in school. And so the deadline, or when it opens, is October 1st. Don't start filling it out early for any of you overachievers out there. because the information gets totally wiped and reset and you will have wasted your time, and we don't want you to do that. So on October 1st, that's when it opens. And then for aid in the state of Michigan, it needs to be completed by March 1st of 2021. So you have a little less than 6 months to get it in. But it's a pretty fluid process. And again, that FAFSA event in October will help you complete that. Next slide, please. So when it comes to choosing a school, there's lots of things to consider, but what the conversation that I'd really encourage you to have now, if you haven't already, with your student is, what does the financial situation look like? Because I think sometimes students don't understand or haven't had a conversation with parents about what's going to be provided for them and what they're going to have to be expected to pay. So I was talking with Ms. Madalena earlier today, and I just remember very clearly my parents sitting me down and be like, we can afford an in-state school, but we can't afford anything else. If you go anywhere else, you're going to have to pay for that. Okay, I'm applying to in-state schools, got it. And so I think having that conversation might be uncomfortable, but it's just really important to have as soon as possible so that students know what their options are. If they really want to go to an expensive school, but they're going to need to pay for it, they need to think if that's going to be a reasonable option for them. Or if they have the financial means to go to any school, that's an important thing to know as well. So I think that's we wish that wasn't the #1 constraint for schools, but it ends up being a pretty big constraint for students. We see students at the end of 13th grade who have this idea that they're going to go to one school, and when the financial reality hits, have to make some adjustments. And so I think going in with realistic expectations is super important. So on that top bullet point, I mentioned it's a good idea to visit the schools you're most interested in. Well, this year that's really, really hard because very few schools are offering like group visits, but a lot are offering some really cool virtual options. So I mentioned I sent out that Excel spreadsheet that lists all these deadlines, and I also included links to all the virtual visit options that are available. So I really encourage students to do virtual tours, to meet with an admissions counselor virtually, and to do all of those things just to get a feel for that school. Some schools are allowing visitors if it's just like one person and a parent. But that's going to really vary on the school and what your comfort level is. So the virtual options are really nice. So when you get like the acceptance letters, there's usually financial aid packages that come a few days later, include that aid and that money. And so it's a really good idea to compare those award letters and the total cost. Because like I mentioned with that Madonna example, their scholarships are really amazing. But if you look at the final cost of what it would be, even the top scholarship, it doesn't cover a whole large chunk of that tuition. So being mindful of what they're offering in aid, and what that total cost would be, and what you will be expected to pay is really important. If there are extenuating circumstances, or if something has changed for your family throughout this year, always feel free to contact that school's financial aid office for specific questions and concerns. They will meet with you one-on-one. They'll talk through your family situation and circumstances. And it's always worth having that conversation just so you have that full picture. Miss Madalena and I are available to help with these conversations. We're able to help review their applications, their essays, all of those things. We can provide that support, whether it's over a Zoom call or in person. We are really available for students to give that help. So don't, never hesitate to reach out to us. Next slide, please. So then when it comes to visiting and talking to admissions reps or admissions counselors, every year we try to set up meetings with admissions reps to come visit our school. In the past, that's been in person. This year, we're doing it all virtually. We had like I said, our first visit yesterday with Madonna. So you can see the schedule of what schools we have coming. This was all based on a survey that I sent out at the end of last year, asking students what schools they're most interested in. I'm still working on trying to arrange other visits by other schools, but some aren't doing that. Some are just doing like where the student initiates the virtual piece. We're still working on scheduling some stuff. We just secured a virtual tour with Oakland University, and we're trying to do the same with Wayne State. And then we're waiting to hear on from U of M and Michigan State. So we're trying to still expose students to as many schools as possible. In these admissions rep visits, they go over the application deadlines, what sort of things you need to include in your application, information about the school and the programs and the majors, and it's always an opportunity for students to ask questions. So even if a student isn't interested in that school, it's a good time for them to think about the pros of that school, what they liked about it, and what they want to make sure that their school includes if that one doesn't include those things. So that is the end of my slides. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Madalena.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up on the panelists. Good job. All right. So parents, I am going to channel Mrs. Newman at the moment and ask you if you're watching and any students watching to cross midline. So if you would just reach across and kind of either tug on your ear or stretch, whichever. And then I'm going to very quickly to liven us up, ask anyone out there who has a good thing to share today to drop it into the chat really quickly right now. So if there's anything positive that you would like to just share for the good of the whole, or something exciting that's happened for your student, now would be a great time for you to drop it into the chat. Okay, come on, parents. Anyone? Good things? And it's already Tuesday evening, so we're going to hopefully get somebody to chime in there. Mrs. Newman, I think, is thinking about one right now. All right, nice. So we have one of our students got into a school already, so congratulations. Mrs. Newman says being back live is awesome. So there we go. At least we'll kick us off. If anybody else would like to chime in, we'll kind of visit those chats along the way. So 13 seminar. We have been meeting, for those of you that are caught up with your student schedule. We are in what's considered phase 4. So our group A students will be attending and have been attending on Mondays from 1:15 to 4 p.m. and virtually on Fridays. Now that time on Fridays, all right, now we're getting somewhere. We're in timeout. We have a student that has a partial scholarship. Very nice. At KCAD, we have students that are working really hard on their OCC for college enrollment. So it's good to hear that some people are on the right track. Very good. And I'm going to pause because I think my internet connection just a little blip. So we're going to hope for the best here. All right. So our Monday group is been attending from 1:15 really, because we're having them come in the door after all of the rest of the students are in their classes, so they're not crisscrossing in the hallway. And last Friday we had our first virtual Zoom class together. If I post out an additional assignment during the week, that amount of time on Friday may vary. So last week, because I posted an assignment through Canvas on Wednesday for the students, we had an hour Zoom meeting on Friday. And there are some new regulations with Zoom meetings that students must use their wbsd.org email to log in. So please make sure your students are utilizing that email and are aware of that. Our Group B students attend on Thursdays from 1:15 to 4, and then again join us for the whole class on Friday during those Zoom sessions. When we go to phase 5, the shift will be 1 to 3 on Mondays and then 1 to 3 in person on Fridays. And for Thursdays, same time shift, 1 to 3 on Thursdays and 1 to 3 on Friday. That gives us the opportunity to have the entire class together on Friday. So we have, Mrs. Bellairs and I have been working diligently since a few weeks before school, actually all summer, who am I kidding, to plan out community building initiatives. So if you have talked with your student, you would know that we're still working on some team building, and we've kicked off the year with the OEC Olympics 2020. In 2012, we kicked off our school year with our version of the Summer Olympics. We did it again in 2016, and so every 4 years we try to follow the pattern. So we have some really cool socially distanced only during their 13th seminar class, and all the other classes are doing those same activities and competing for medals during their focus classes. So we have worked very hard to plan those activities primarily for these 13th graders, but also to get them working together as a group, and for the rest of the school to get them to realize that we spend lots of time on social emotional support and learning and building that community for their engagement. If we have town hall meetings hosted on Friday, which we did have one 2 weeks ago, the students are encouraged to attend and expected to attend if it does not conflict with a college class. So we know that that's a problem for some of our 13th graders. So we are working with them, but we do expect their attendance if they do not have a college class. Mrs. Newman, if you could advance the next slide. So this document that you're seeing was pulled directly from their course practice. So they have a copy. It's also posted in their Canvas account so that they can see the course practice, which is a description of what we do in 13 seminar. And you can very quickly read through that list. So Mrs. Bellaire's already mentioned that we utilize Zello to explore our careers and possible schools and set goals and track our activities. All students will be creating a professional portfolio this year. I find it to be extremely valuable. I know that my own sons have utilized their portfolios. I've had students that have sent me messages back and say, oh my gosh, I instantly got the job because I had a portfolio. And I think that even though we're moving into a paperless society, that having a tangible portfolio to keep all of your important documents and demonstrate your growth and your movement into the professional world is extremely important. So we do work on that. We also will be throughout the year completing a budget project and trying to identify what sort of taxes we're going to have to pay in the future and what kind of expenses we might have if we're living independently. So there are many other things on that list, and along with what Mrs. Bellaire's rattled off with our college visits, it is a strategic schedule that we try to keep. In the past, we have completed and participated in mock interviews once our professional portfolios are completed, and that is generally our final exam. I am envisioning this year that in order for me to pull that off, that I am going to need students to participate through Zoom calls in order to complete those mock interviews. But I am anticipating that I'm going to have a bit of a struggle with getting my college instructors, deans, and counselors to complete all those Zooms. So I may have to reach out to some of our parents who would be willing to possibly step in and host some of those interviews. So I'm just going to put that out there to those of you that are on the call right now. I may need to reach out and ask you to possibly conduct a few virtual interviews. I do want that experience for these students because I think it's extremely valuable to have that kind of dialogue with someone who is in an adult position and is in a professional world. Students will also very quickly need to participate in an ASC seminar, which those are online and can be accessed at any point. I already know that some students are doing that through some of their classes, and we can double dip on that. The internship is the biggest piece that is a slight problem for us this year because typically students are released 1 seat time hour per week to dedicate towards their internship, in which they need to complete 40 hours of service. And that service is not just general volunteer service wherever. It is in a situation where I am able to communicate with the supervisor and track the progress, and then conclude with a review from that person in charge. So we do have students that, and I will be talking more about that over the next few weeks, but we do have students that potentially can instigate and have instigated their own internships. So we call that an independent internship, but they cannot start an independent internship until they give me the contact information. They tell me about the placement they've secured, and then I communicate with that person in charge and verify that it is an appropriate space for your student to be volunteering. So for example, if it was in somebody's home, that would not be approved. It generally would be with a nonprofit organization, or it would be in a business, or it would be in a school setting where they would be volunteering their time. So we are working to mitigate our issues with that. What we're doing now is we're training our students to become student mentors. And after our SAT test, which is next Wednesday, we will be beginning our mentoring program, which we will set up through our class time, and they will be mentoring the younger new students at OEC. And once we complete that, that will count for 10 of their 40 hours. So we're trying to make sure that we do some sort of service at this moment when I cannot just place everybody out due to the limitations with phase 4. So I'm not in a position where I can place students in phase 4. And we also have a lot of locations that are on hold with accepting volunteers. So people need to generally be employed now to be able to be coming into a workplace and not be volunteers. So we have some hurdles to cross with that. We will adapt as needed in the event that we do not progress to phase 5 as we had hoped. So please don't worry about that, but I will tell you that if your student has an opportunity that they think that they might be able to volunteer within, and it is related to their career interests, or if it's just volunteer service that they are interested in, they may contact me and I can communicate with them, and they can independently get started knowing that I'm not placing them and the district is not placing them. That is your permission as a parent that would be allowing them to do that at this time, and not my permission. That would be all up to you to allow them to do that, but we could count that as service if they chose to do that. But again, that's not endorsed by the school because we're not allowed to put your student into that situation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. Real quick, I want to address a question that I can put in: are the students required to volunteer? So if Mrs. Newman will advance to the next slide, I'm going to jump ahead to one so I can answer that question. Okay, students are required as an early college student to complete 40 hours of volunteer service through a coordinated internship, which means that I am in contact and can validate that service with the person that supervised that time. So they can't just go down the street and rake leaves.
We lost Miss Bellairs and we're almost losing Miss Madalena. Let me answer that question while we're waiting.
Or a neighbor, and count that will show up in my slides in a few minutes. So am I back?
For a moment, but here comes Carly back too. I was just going to say, yeah, they're required to volunteer, but we will make adjustments if needed because of COVID. But now you can continue. I was just stalling. If I
okay, good.
Do like tap dance, like I'd like.
Yeah, like you'll do a wiggle for me. I'm sorry, I don't know why my internet connection is so weird when I pay so much for my internet service, which is crazy. So yes, students are required to volunteer for this 40-hour internship, 10 of which this year they will cover through their mentoring program. And then we are hoping to have them all eligible to participate in their internships for the remaining 30 hours, beginning by late time in the semester or by next semester. That's our hope. We will adjust as needed when we get to that point. Again, if a student has an independent internship opportunity that they think could work, they can contact me and I can make that contact with those people, verify that it is a good internship. So let me just put a caution on that. Volunteering for somebody that's an immediate family member has generally been an absolute no. Simply because it's that puts us in an awkward position to validate that service. So if they have other opportunities, please have them reach out to me and I would be happy to talk with them about that. And then of course, any service is documented on literally paper time logs, which I keep and audit all year long. Mrs. Newman, if you could advance the slide. In terms of, are we providing, I'm going to answer this other question. Are we providing a list of volunteer opportunities? So right at the moment, the volunteer opportunities that we have are all going to be in-house. We are working on the mentoring program where students will be credited time for that, but that will count towards their internship hours. When we get to the point of me helping them find placements for internships, I do have a good number of places where I will help them and they can choose from my options. They are not all going to be perfectly matched to their career interests. They're going to be where I can place them. And I do have concerns this year that because of our COVID restrictions that I may lose some of those particular internships, but we will try our best to make sure that we refill all of those options. And again, the reality is we are helping them achieve their MEMCA certificate, and it may not be a perfect fit. So it's definitely not going to be the corner office at Ford where you are doing an internship, but it will be something that will help advance your career readiness skills. Additionally, one other caveat, students cannot receive payment during their internship hours. So they cannot receive payment. All right, so in addition, when students are ready to start and begin an internship, we will ask you to sign a letter of understanding. So the student, the parent, myself, and Mrs. Newman will all sign this letter so that we are of the understanding that we are helping your student commit to the internship and find a placement if needed, and coordinating with the confirmation of those hours, but we are not liable for that situation. So you need to sign that for us so that you know where your student's going, what the situation is. Some examples of internship locations. In the past, we've had students volunteering at the 47th District Court, which is in Farmington Hills, right at the corner of Orchard Lake and 11 Mile. We've had students volunteer with the American Red Cross. We've had students volunteer with Plymouth Physical Therapy. We've had students with the Farmington Hills Youth After School Program. We have had students with the YMCA. So there are a variety of locations, just rattling off a few, but we make sure that they're all public locations and that you are fully aware that it's happening so that you are providing permission for it to occur. So Mrs. Newman, if you could advance to the next slide. And again, just to tip off, this is a quick screenshot of what it would look like inside of Zello. The students will be required as a graduation requirement to complete their Zello requirements and achieve a status of 100% prior to graduation. We worked diligently in Focus 12 last year with Mrs. Whelan and Mr. Heffelbauer and myself. We all made sure that our students did a lot of career exploration, especially using this when we were virtual for a while. So students should have had some good opportunities to be guided through utilizing their Zello program. Next slide, please. The MEMCA certificate would look something similar to the document you see. That's not as fancy as our cute MEMCA certificates, but it's similar. It is a requirement for all early college students to achieve not only their high school diploma, but also satisfy their college and career readiness through an internship or 100 verifiable general service hours. We have opted to go with the internship because it is almost impossible for us to track just general service. So we need to make sure that we can help our students reach that 40 hours and be able to confirm that time. This year, again, students will be completing, as we anticipated, 30 hours of an internship plus 10 hours through our mentoring program that we hope to start within the next 2 weeks after our SAT testing is over. We have incorporated the internship into the 13 seminar course just to simply support and help and be able to provide that extra opportunity for our students through the course. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the Service Learning Honor Cord, at the time of graduation, students can earn honor cords to wear with their cap and gown for the completion or for achieving different things. For example, we have cords for different GPA achievements. So between a 3.0 and a 3.49 is one color of a cord, between a 3.5 and up to a 4.0 is another color of a cord, and a 4.0 and up would be receiving a medallion. But in addition to that, when students earn their MEMCA certificate, they receive a stole to wear at graduation. If they complete 60 hours of recorded service by their last day of school, they will also receive a white Service Learning Honor Cord. The internship, 40 hours of that internship are included in that 60 hours. So they only need an additional 20 hours of service. Many students have service already on record that is kept and housed on a log in my classroom. And there will be other opportunities throughout the year to accrue service. Mrs. Newman, next slide, please. If your student happens to be in the National Honor Society and they meet their service learning requirements through National Honor Society, since it is a service learning organization, they will also receive a blue honor cord to wear at graduation. In that case, we are working with the students, and I can tell you right now, I apologize, there's a typo on this slide. If you are a 2-year member, you need to have 55 hours of volunteer service. Sorry, that was a repetition. What that means, if you were a student, your student joined NHS and was inducted into NHS as a junior or a 3rd-year student, they will need 55 hours of service and they would be a 2-year member. If they are were inducted during their 12th grade year, they will need 30 hours of service on record and maintain a 3.4 overall GPA with a 3.0 at OCC to earn this cord. These hours for National Honor Society cannot overlap and do not duplicate with the hours, the 60 hours that a student would need for their internship, or for the 40 hours for the internship and the additional 20 for the service learning cord. Those are separate service hours. So students who end up with both cords would generally have 115 service hours. Mrs. Newman, next slide. All right. So we're almost to the close here, so feel free to add questions if you have them while I am rattling off these last bits. Students will need to complete their
Oh no, everyone cross midline again while we're waiting. Everyone cross midline.
Independently.
Okay, wait, start over. We lost all that.
But
hold on, start over.
Mrs. Belair's already mentioned, she and I are both a particular.
We missed all of that. Your fancy internet was not working well.
My fancy internet that I seriously pay a lot of money for makes me crazy. So we have been working on that. We just don't know what it is. Am I back?
You are back. So if you could just start the slide over as if nothing happened.
We had a glitch. Can you imagine if those poor teachers that are teaching virtually and this happened all the time? I'd have to like sit on top of my roof and hold my arm up so I could get a better signal, apparently. Okay, let's start this one again. Students need to complete their own college applications. It is not appropriate for Mrs. Bellairs and I to sit there and help them push the submit button. You can do that at home. However, we are willing to support them in any way, and they are welcome to make appointments with me to stay after class on their class day, but they cannot crisscross with the AB group. So if they are a Monday student, they need to make an appointment to meet with me on Monday after school, unless we arrange other time by Zoom or through email support. For the class, students will all submit one sample college essay simply for a class assignment so that I can help them work through how to appropriately write for a prompt in a college essay. Essay review and editing is always available. I do a lot of that. If students will send me via email some of their essays, a lot of times for the support essays where there are 3 or 4 that go to the same school, they'll put them in a Google Doc or just continuously put them on the same email or document that they submit, and I edit along. Generally speaking, I will print those and write the edits out and then hand it back to them the next time I see them, because it is far faster for me to give them a lot of information if I can write on the document, draw arrows, than it is for me to try to type comments in, but I do try both ways. Additional help is always available. One of the things that Mrs. Bellairs will often, and I often work on, is their activities that they put into the Common App or into their applications, because it matters. Mrs. Bellairs went through this the other day in both classes, talking about which activities should be listed at the top versus which activities should be listed at the bottom, and how to word those, because sometimes students will undersell themselves when it comes to those activities based on the language they choose. So we do often work with them on how to make sure that they have ordered them properly and also represented themselves completely with all of their activities. And what I've noticed over the years is that a lot of students will actually forget some of their activities, and then Mrs. Bellairs and I will be more in tune with it and be able to say, hey, what about this you did? And what about that? So it does help if they do come engaged and ready to participate in class when we work on this, and use us as resources for assistance. Next, the SAT is being offered next Wednesday. Students needed to opt in. There was an email sent. At this point, that window has closed, but if they still complete the form, they are going to be put on a wait list. But it is the one and only time we're going to be able to proctor it and offer it for free. We are encouraging all of our 13th graders to take that. Even if their school is not requesting and requiring scores, there are many of these schools that are still expecting you to submit a score in order to qualify for the scholarship. So it would be absolutely awful if a student was accepted to a school and then did not qualify for any of the scholarships simply because they never took the SAT and didn't have a score to submit. So please encourage your student, ask your student if they already filled out the opt-in form, because the state is requiring it be an opt-in form for this SAT next Wednesday. But that is we're strongly encouraging students take that just so they have one on record at this point. If you have additional questions, you can contact Mrs. Bellairs or myself by email. Our emails are at the bottom and also on the school website. We do have a question in the chat. Let me see. Are the service hour requirements for just this year or for all years at OEC? The internship hours must happen this year. The other general service and NHS hours are hours that they could have already been accruing. So general service can be anything that they had volunteered for since the start of 9th grade. The NHS hours can only be counted once the student is inducted into the National Honor Society. And we do keep track of those. They have time log slips to turn in. Our NHS slips are always blue, and our general service are always white, and our internship slips are always gold. So color coding is one way that I keep track of all of those hours, so that I have a paper log that backs up my electronic log, and I can always audit those hours for students throughout time. So if there are any other questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Hopefully I answered that question for you.
I think one of the questions that a parent submitted prior to this was asking about graduation requirements. So I just want to touch on that really quickly. So for the high school graduation requirements, they're the standard ones that have been there. So the 4 credits of English, 4 credits of math, 3 credits of science, 3 credits of social studies, a half credit of gym and health, and then 1 credit of visual performing arts, and then 2 credits of a foreign language. And all those credits are at the high school level. And so throughout their years at OEC, that's something that I've been monitoring. They may have had requirements that they were fulfilling at the college level. And so I've touched base with them, and that's always on their credit kind of form that gets submitted to the college. So for the most part, I think we only have a couple students. Most of our students have completed their high school graduation requirements, with the exception of 13th seminar and the things that come along with that. So there are some students who are this semester working on some of those high school requirements at the college level, and we'll hopefully have that done. And then a couple of students are finishing up a high school class. If they are in a high school class outside of 13th seminar, parents are aware. So just know that. And if it comes time, like when it comes time for next semester, I'll be providing an updated sheet that lets you know that will be sent home with the student how many credits they've completed, their high school and college GPA as I see it right now, so that we can know what chords they should be expecting, and then let you know if there's any outstanding graduation requirements that they're still working on. But if you ever want to just check in on how your student is and where they're progressing, feel free to reach out. And that's something that, again, that I go over every time we meet with them, those 3 times a year. So they're all in good positions. It's just doing the requirements through 13th seminar and making sure that those get completed is the most important part right now.
And to tie into that, there was one item that is extremely important in 13th seminar and in 13th grade that I did hop right over, and that is the 13th seminar capstone project. So in the springtime, students will be required to complete a capstone project. It is a graduation requirement. We built it into the 13th seminar course because it was always a graduation requirement for OEC students. And that capstone capstone project in a nutshell is a student's opportunity in a 15-minute presentation to give us an overview of where they have been, where they are now, and where they're going academically, and to discuss their journey and their growth along the way. We do have some other fun elements that we work into it, and parents and other guests are invited to view those presentations. Generally, they would be presented live. It will determine or depend on where we are at in terms of our return to learn plans in the spring. We may move that project up depending on what our status is in terms of moving it earlier in the year if I need to balance time for internship hours. And again, that will depend on what the prognosis is as we move further into the semester. But last spring, Mrs. Bellairs and I viewed all 52 capstone presentations through Zoom with class members and with guests, and it actually turned out to be a very remarkable, very rewarding opportunity for all the students, and I believe it was equally beneficial even if it wasn't live. So that is also something that the students will be accomplishing this year and is a graduation requirement. Mrs. Newman, back to you.
So I just wanted to say a couple things in summary. Number one, if your student filled out the bubble sheet, that doesn't mean they're necessarily testing, because I have to have their name on the opt-in form to document for the state. So if your student did not opt in to take the test, you can still go to the form, but right now I'm working on a first come, first served basis for what seats are left, because we had to submit numbers to make sure we had enough seats at West Bloomfield High School to be able to test, and they had to get proctors. So check with your student, but just because they bubbled doesn't mean that they actually opted in, and I do have to have them actually opt in. So, check, please. The other thing is, I want to just reiterate one more time that the internship hours cannot be paid. So someone cannot use their job or get paid and count that time, because we're using that as seat time for the state. So those internship hours are another act of service, because early colleges are about service, because you're getting so much money for free tuition. We give back to balance the universe. So those cannot be paid. And then also, I just want to make sure you understand, because if this is your first student, you might not understand how valuable 13 Seminar is. So my daughter graduated from a traditional public high school, and I actually paid money to have all of the same pieces that you're getting free in 13 Seminar. And so I am sure that the person I hired, that you probably know, gave me quite a discount for that service, but you could pay easily up to $50 to $100 for sure to have that work done, like per hour. So probably more like 100 for the editing and looking at how to word things for your Common App. So we invested a lot of money and time for that service outside of the school day, and it was definitely worth it, but you're getting it for free. And so I just want to make sure that you realize the value, and that your student realizes the value of 13 Seminar, because I'm sure they're like, I don't want to go, blah, blah, blah. But they're really getting a lot of free help getting into the schools that they want, that other schools, especially public schools, are absolutely not getting, because they don't have it worked into how they do school. So I really just have to say that these two ladies are amazing. Madalena will be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, emailing and communicating with students. She will spend hours and hours and hours of her life getting to November 1st when all of those applications are in. And Miss Bellairs, same thing. Like, she meets with students during, her, I would say, office hours time, right? Which is a little harder now, but she communicates back and forth. She works harder than I would contend a lot of counselors, because she has the opportunity to really get to know these students. And she will be very blunt. Miss Madalena will be very blunt. So tell your student that they're going to get very candid feedback, because their goal is to get your student into the school that they want. So it's not going to be, oh, that was so nice. It's going to be change this, change this, change this. That's what we experienced, and it was extremely helpful. But again, I paid, you don't have to pay. And so I am very, very grateful that this is part of how we do school. I think is a huge opportunity for students. So I would just be remiss if I didn't say that. Any other questions for us?
Just because we were talking about all the great things that are free. So to add on, like, where you might see a bill. So hopefully it won't be new information. Because, I work really hard with Miss Kelly. Miss Kelly works super hard to notify you through like a paper bill if your student failed or withdrew from a class at the college level, they do have to pay OEC back for that class. That was in a document that you completed when you originally came to OEC.
And that's a state requirement, by the way. The state mandates that you pay us back.
Yep. So if a student, withdrew from a class or failed a class, they do have to pay us back. And so we are able to kind of have some grace period with that. But that grace period ends when they graduate, because then they're no longer at school. And so, we, again, work really hard to set up bills. I think I contact every parent who's in that situation in case your child has not conveyed that information to you, which is sometimes the case. But that's just something to be mindful of, that if a student still owes money, that we hold on to their diploma until that is paid. So I just want you to be aware of that. And I make sure that those pieces of information get sent home. But that's just like an early heads up, because those kind of things come out end of February, early March. So just like an early heads up, if you know that your student withdrew or failed the class, and you just want to know what your total balance is, or start making payments, and by you, I mean your child, because it's on them, then it might be a good idea to start doing that, because Ms. Kelly will take payments as like $5 a week if you want to do that, and that might be an easier way to spread out that payment. It's probably my least favorite part of my job, is making those calls and sending home those bills, but just as a heads up, in case you know that that's a situation that your student is in.
And to add on to that, this is an extremely trying transition for your students, because this is probably the first time that they've pretty much had a full-time college load. Plus they have their college applications. Plus we have internships we're talking about and are in the uncertain world. In addition, really 13 Seminar is a support class that helps them navigate through their last graduation requirements, but also provides them with pieces that are going to help them transition into that career readiness world. All of our students are not most likely going to land exactly where they anticipate and think that they are right now, and they need your support in being able to figure out how to get through that trail and make those good decisions. But they also need your support in the options that they have. Some of our students may end up staying at the community college. Some of our students may end up going to a trade school. Some of our students might end up in the military. Some of our students might take a gap year. I know that right now, more students have, off the cuff mentioned taking gap years because of the uncertainties around. They don't want to have what happened to the class of 2020 happen to them, where they anticipate going off to school and then lo and behold, their school's virtual and now they're still home. So it is really important that if you're hearing me, you take some time to try to draw that conversation out with your student, but also check in with them on this virtual learning that they're doing at the college, because it is not the perfect situation for your students. It is not giving them the best. It is getting by, is what I would call it. And I would encourage you to just pick for information, because I know students kind of withhold and they don't want to talk about it. But in terms of that, I would very much encourage you to ask what their schedule is, ask how the class is going, ask if they've used the support that's offered through the college. You can still access virtual tutoring through the Academic Support Center. These are things that are extremely important, especially if your student is taking a math class at the college. And by a show of hands in class the other day, I know that at least half of my Monday group is taking a math class right now. And I encourage them to buddy up with the people in the class so that they could have their own study group, because we had some serious issues in the winter term, which was the last of the class of 2020, with math classes really challenging them when they were virtual. So I would really encourage you to keep tabs on your student throughout this virtual learning, just so that they have support that they need.
And then the last thing that I would say while you guys are reading that comment is, as a parent who literally just graduated my daughter, it goes so quickly. So I would encourage you to take the opportunity to drive to Target together, play a board game together. Any last bits of time, no matter what it is, take advantage, because they might just talk through some of this with you, and that will just be precious time that you can't get back. So take advantage of every second you can get because it will go really, really quickly.
Yeah, so our question that just popped up is if we have a student that's going to continue on at OCC or is even applying to a four-year school that does not require an essay, we are utilizing the prompts from the Common App. They've already been shared with your student. They were shared by email. They were screen shared in our Zoom call last week. I have not asked them to start that essay per se. I asked them to start thinking about what essay prompt they would like to choose because I still want to nurture them through the process of writing and editing that essay so that in the event that they decide a couple years from now that they want to go to college and they want to go to a competitive school or they want to apply to a graduate program where there's most likely going to be an essay, they will have had that experience and they could even resurrect that essay if needed. So I still will expect that as a course requirement, whether they are going to utilize it or not. Hopefully they will utilize it if they are applying to a four-year school, they'll utilize it at one of their schools. And if they're not using the Common App prompt, I will begin telling them that they can do a substitution if they have a school they're applying to that has a different prompt. So I have already provided that and they have not yet started that assignment, but they will, and I will give them another copy of that when it comes time.
Any other questions for us? All right, I know everyone couldn't join, but I hope everybody is able to watch the recording because there's lots of information here. It will be shared out, and so even if you sat through it today and you just wanted to click through and have some reminders, it will be there. But please don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. It can be a really tense time right now in the fall. It feels better once you get to November 1st because all that stuff is kind of put away. But definitely reach out if you have questions and then encourage your student to do the same thing because the stress is going to build. And so just help them navigate that. And some of that is just listening and just listening and trying really hard not to speak. I'm not that good at that, but I encourage other people to try to do it because I know it's very valuable. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us. Round of applause for our presenters, Miss Madalena, Miss Bellairs, the real new parenting team of the 13th graders. That's it. Go team. Have a wonderful evening. As I always say, pick up your belongings on the way out of the theater. Please make sure you didn't leave anything behind. Thank you so much.